For 2 years, Russia believed it had built 3 untouchable air bases in Crimea. Belbek, tucked just outside Sevastopol, Saki, sitting on the northwest coast, and Fardiska, near Simferopol in the interior. Around each one, Russia stacked layer after layer of air defense, radar coverage, overlapping radar coverage, until the peninsula looked on paper like the most heavily defended piece of real estate in the entire war. And starting in 2024, Russia added something it had never needed before on its own soil. Brand new, reinforced concrete shelters, built specifically because Ukrainian drones had become dangerous enough that leaving a fighter jet parked out in the open was no longer an option. These weren't cheap. Russia spent millions of dollars per structure, built roughly 10 of them at Saki alone, and expanded the program to 14 air bases across occupied Crimea and southern Russia. The message to every Russian pilot stationed there was simple: you are protected now. Whatever Ukraine throws at this base, the concrete will absorb it, and you will fly again tomorrow. That confidence held for a while. Then, on a single night at the end of June 2026, something happened at one of these bases that Russia had spent 2 years and untold millions trying to prevent. And the way it happened, the specific details of where the jet was standing and what the drone actually did to reach it, tells you something far more important than the loss of one aircraft. Because here's the question worth asking before we even get into what happened. Russia didn't just hope its shelters would work. It engineered them, tested them, poured concrete specifically calculated to survive the exact kind of weapon Ukraine was using at the time. So how does a country with that level of preparation still lose a fighter jet on the ground at one of its most fortified positions in a war that's supposedly been going on long enough for both sides to know exactly what the other is capable of? The answer starts with a detail that almost nobody expected. On the night of June 25th into June 26th, 2026, operators from Ukraine's HUR, the country's military intelligence directorate, struck Belbek Airfield near Sevastopol. A Russian MiG-29 Fulcrum, a frontline multi-role fighter jet, was destroyed. And in that same strike, the drone caught something Ukraine almost certainly wasn't even expecting to find: a mobile airfield support vehicle. The kind of equipment used to power up and prepare aircraft before a mission, was actively working on a second combat jet at the exact moment the strike landed. That vehicle burned along with the MiG-29. Ukraine didn't just take out one aircraft that night. It took out the equipment keeping the next one ready to fly. HUR released footage of the strike 9 days later, on July 4th, and estimated the combined damage at tens of millions of dollars. It's worth being upfront here that this is HUR's own assessment of the damage, not something independently verified by outside analysts. But the video itself, showing the drone's final approach and the moment of impact, is hard to argue with. Now here comes the twist that changes how you should think about this whole story. Most people hearing about a jet destroyed at one of Crimea's most fortified air bases would assume Ukraine had finally cracked some new, sophisticated way to reach a plane hidden deep inside one of those expensive concrete shelters Russia spent 2 years building. That is not what happened at Belbek. The MiG-29 wasn't tucked away behind reinforced concrete at all. It was sitting out in the open on the tarmac, parked exactly the same way aircraft have always been parked at that base, going back decades. Hear that again, because it matters. Russia built the shelters. Russia had them ready. And on the night that actually mattered, the jet that burned wasn't even inside one. That raises an obvious question. Was this even a real fighter jet, or is Ukraine exaggerating what it hit? It's a fair thing to ask, and honestly, it's happened before. Back in December 2025, HUR claimed it had destroyed a MiG-29 at a different Crimean airfield called Kacha. Independent analysts looked closer and started raising doubts because Kacha has historically been a base for helicopters and flying boats, not fighter jets. At least one expert who reviewed the footage for the war zone suggested the aircraft might have been a decoy, deliberately placed there to draw Ukrainian strikes away from more valuable targets nearby. That kind of scrutiny is a good thing, and it's worth acknowledging rather than pretending every claim in this war is airtight. But it's also exactly why Belbek is different. Belbek has a long, well-documented history as a real operational fighter base. This isn't a facility known for decoys or empty gestures. It's the kind of place where losing a genuine combat aircraft actually costs Russia something it can't easily explain away. And here's a detail that adds weight to the whole picture. The same night HUR was striking Belbek, a completely separate Ukrainian agency, the SBU, was hitting Russian spy ships and an S-400 air defense system near occupied Kerch, dozens of kilometers away. 2 different organizations, 2 different operations, happening on the exact same night, without any public indication that either one was waiting on the other. So think about what that actually tells you. This wasn't one lucky drone slipping through a single gap in Russia's defenses. It was happening at multiple points on the map, on the same night, from different Ukrainian agencies working independently. And if that's true for one night in late June, the question becomes far bigger than one destroyed jet. Because if the aircraft wasn't hiding in a shelter, then what actually happened to all those expensive concrete bunkers Russia spent millions of dollars building? Did they simply never get used at Belbek? Or is there something deeper going on with how well they're actually working elsewhere in Crimea? That question doesn't stay unanswered for long, because just days after Belbek, Ukraine turned its attention to Saki Air Base on Crimea's northwest coast, home to the exact Russian squadron that flies the glide bombs hitting southern Ukrainian cities almost every day. And what happened there put Russia's entire shelter program to a direct test, one that exposed something Russian engineers never accounted for when they poured that concrete in the first place. To understand why those concrete bunkers matter so much, you have to go back to why Russia built them in the first place, because the story behind the shelters is almost as revealing as their failure. Back in autumn 2024, Russia's own defense minister ordered a nationwide construction program. Reinforced concrete aircraft shelters were built at bases across occupied Crimea and southern Russia. The logic made sense at the time. Russia's newer fighter jets, planes like the Su-30, the Su-34, the Su-35, were simply too large to fit inside the old Soviet-era shelters built decades earlier. Those older bunkers had been designed for smaller aircraft from a different generation of warfare. So Russia had to start fresh, pouring brand new concrete, engineering shelters specifically calculated to survive the drone warheads Ukraine was using at that exact moment in time. Here's the problem nobody in Moscow saw coming. In May 2026, a Ukrainian drone manufacturer called Firepoint announced something that quietly rewrote the entire calculation. Its FP-2 strike drone got a redesigned wing, and that redesign let it carry a warhead nearly twice its previous weight. The company's own chief designer described the upgraded version in blunt terms: a cheap replacement for a guided bomb. That single upgrade mattered enormously, because Russia's shelters had been engineered against the threat that existed back in late 2024, when Ukrainian drone warheads were roughly half that size. By the time Russia finished pouring, reinforcing, and completing construction through 2025, Ukraine had already leaped past the exact threat level those shelters were built to survive. And here's the part that should genuinely catch your attention, because it isn't what most people assume. The drone doesn't actually need to punch a clean hole through the concrete to destroy whatever's parked inside. A blast of that size cracks the inner surface of the wall, and the concrete itself turns into a spray of high-speed fragments, flying inward with lethal force. Russia poured that concrete to keep the explosion out. Instead, the explosion turned the concrete into the very thing doing the damage, from inside the shelter itself. Days after Belbek, Ukraine tested exactly this theory against Saki, the airbase on Crimea's northwest coast that flies the glide bombs hitting southern Ukrainian cities almost daily. On the night of July 1st, drones hit hangars there. 2 nights later, on July 3rd, Ukraine struck again, this time hitting 7 hangars in a single coordinated operation. And this is where the story gets almost impossible to ignore. Satellite imagery reviewed afterward confirmed that 6 of the 7 hardened shelters at Saki had been damaged. 4 of them had their reinforced doors blown clean off the hinges, found lying flat on the taxiway in front of the very structures they were built to protect. Roofs largely intact, doors gone, which tells you exactly what kind of explosion happened inside, not outside. So picture what Russian engineers actually built here: a fortress designed specifically to keep Ukrainian drones from reaching the aircraft inside. And within a matter of months after finishing construction, that same fortress became the mechanism doing the killing, because the pressure wave had nowhere to go but inward, straight at the jet it was meant to shield. Here's the question that should be keeping Russian commanders up at night right now. If one night at Belbek and 1 week at Saki produced this much damage, was this simply one exceptionally lucky Ukrainian operation? Or is there something much bigger and far more organized behind all of this? Something that explains how Ukraine keeps finding these openings again and again, at different bases, on different nights, without Russia ever managing to close the gap. Here's what actually makes this campaign so difficult for Russia to defend against, and it has nothing to do with a single miracle weapon or one brilliant strike. This isn't a single unit running a single operation. It's 3 entirely separate Ukrainian organizations, each with its own drones, its own targets, and its own chain of command, frequently striking on the exact same nights without any obvious coordination between them. Ukraine's military intelligence directorate, hit Belbek using its own proprietary drone systems, equipment that hasn't been publicly identified and that operates under an entirely different legal authority than Ukraine's regular armed forces. The SBU, Ukraine's domestic security service, ran the Saki and Hvardiska strikes through its own specialized Alpha unit, under a newly appointed acting chief named Major General Yevhen Kamara. And then there's the Unmanned Systems Forces, Ukraine's dedicated drone warfare command led by Robert Magyar Brovdy, which spent those same nights hitting radar stations, power infrastructure, and fuel depots across the rest of the peninsula entirely on its own. These three agencies have completely different sets of drones and three different philosophies about what to hit and when. And here's why that combination is such a nightmare for whoever's running Russia's air defense in Crimea. Those defense systems are built to prioritize incoming threats, tracking and engaging targets in sequence. But that tracking capacity has a hard limit. It can only process so many incoming threats per second before the whole system essentially chokes under the load. Now imagine strikes arriving from multiple directions, at multiple altitudes, launched by three separate organizations that aren't necessarily telling each other what they're planning. Russia's air defense isn't looking at one coordinated wave it can prepare for. It's looking at scattered, overlapping threats appearing from every angle at once, and a meaningful percentage of those drones simply get through, not because Russia's systems are broken, but because there's a limit to how much any tracking algorithm can handle before it runs out of processing power. The scale of what Ukraine is actually running right now should genuinely surprise you. Brovdy's own numbers from June alone show over 8,500 strike sorties in a single month, spread across deep strikes, mid-range hits, and short-range attacks. That works out to a target struck somewhere in Russian-controlled territory roughly every 52 seconds, day and night, for an entire month. Brovdy himself summarized what this has done to Russia's home territory in a single sentence. There is no longer a peaceful rear across the European part of Russia. Let that sink in for a moment, because it changes how you should think about everything Russia has built in Crimea. Concrete shelters worth millions of dollars each, layered air defense stacked across the peninsula. None of it was designed to survive three independent, overlapping campaigns hitting the same territory night after night. It was designed for a slower, more predictable kind of war, one where Russia could see a threat coming and respond to it one target at a time. So if three separate Ukrainian agencies can already destroy jets inside Russia's most fortified bases, using drones that cost a fraction of what the aircraft themselves are worth, what actually happens next? Does Russia try to move its remaining aircraft somewhere safer, further from Crimea, accepting a weaker air campaign in exchange for survival? Or does it keep its jets exactly where they are, hoping the next strike misses, while the concrete shelters that were supposed to protect them keep failing in exactly the same way? Neither answer is one Russia actually wants to give. Option one is simple enough to explain. Take the aircraft that are still sitting in Crimea and move them somewhere safer, further from the peninsula, beyond the roughly 370-kilometer range of Ukraine's upgraded strike drones. That solves the immediate survival problem. The jets stop burning on the ground. But it creates a completely different problem that Russia can't avoid either. Moving those planes deeper into Russian territory means longer flight times to reach anything happening inside Ukraine. It means burning more fuel just getting to the target, which leaves less room for weapons on board. It means faster wear on airframes and engines that are already stretched thin after years of constant combat operations. And it means fewer bombing runs completed per day, because every single sortie now takes longer from takeoff to return. Option two is staying put. Keep the remaining aircraft at the forward Crimean bases where they've always operated, close enough to strike Ukraine quickly and efficiently, but accept that the concrete shelters no longer offer the protection they were designed to provide against a 200-kilogram warhead. The planes stay close to the fight, and they keep getting destroyed, one strike at a time, exactly the way Belbek and Saki just demonstrated. There's no third option quietly waiting in the wings here, and Russia's own behavior over the past few weeks makes that painfully obvious. Because when you look at what Russia is actually doing right now, not what it's saying publicly, but what it's physically building and welding onto its own military hardware, you start to see just how limited its options really are. The clearest evidence of this isn't even happening on land. It's happening at sea. British Defense Intelligence confirmed in early July that 3 out of 4 Russian Kilo-class submarines stationed at Novorossiysk have had improvised metal cage armor welded directly onto their conning towers. Not because someone designed a new submarine defense system from scratch, but as a direct, hurried response to the same kind of Ukrainian drone threat that's been burning jets in Crimea. It's the exact same cope cage logic that tanks on both sides adopted back in 2022, when crews started bolting scrap metal onto their vehicles, hoping it would stop incoming drones. Except now it's showing up on submarines. Russia's aircraft shelters, its submarine hulls, and apparently its entire Western military posture are all reaching for the same improvised, desperate fix. Weld something on, hope it holds, and wait to see if the next strike gets through anyway. And here's an irony sitting right next to all of this that most people probably missed entirely. Just days before the Belbek strike happened, Poland's own defense minister announced that Poland would not be sending its remaining MiG-29 fighters to Ukraine after all. The reason was straightforward. Poland had proposed a deal, MiGs in exchange for access to Ukrainian drone technology, and according to Poland's government, Ukraine never actually followed through on that agreement. So Poland decided it would rather scrap its own aging jets than hand them over without getting anything in return. Here's what makes that decision almost impossible to ignore. The exact category of drone technology Poland wanted access to is the same category of technology that just destroyed a Russian MiG-29 sitting inside one of Crimea's most fortified air bases. Poland is dismantling old Soviet-era jets it no longer has any real use for. Ukraine, meanwhile, is actively destroying Russia's operational ones, using precisely the kind of technology Poland walked away from. So step back for a second and look at where this actually leaves Russia. Its jets are trapped between two bad choices. Its submarines are wearing improvised armor because there's nothing better available. And even its own allies watching from the outside can see clearly enough that the technology behind these strikes is now decisive enough to reshape entire diplomatic relationships. That raises the obvious next question. Does all of this actually point towards something much bigger happening to Russia's entire war effort at once? Every previous chapter of this campaign targeted a different piece of Russia's war machine. Oil refineries, supply bridges feeding Crimea, the ports sheltering what's left of the Black Sea Fleet, the electrical grid keeps the peninsula running. What just happened at Belbek, Saki, and Hvardiska represents something genuinely new. This is aviation attrition, the direct and systematic destruction of the actual aircraft dropping bombs on Ukrainian cities, happening inside positions Russia genuinely believed were its safest, most defended real estate on the entire peninsula. Look closely at the numbers involved here because they tell you everything about why this particular pressure point matters so much. A Ukrainian strike drone costs somewhere around $55,000 to build. A single Su-30SM fighter jet, the exact aircraft type stationed at Saki, costs somewhere between $30 and $50 million. That's an exchange rate of roughly 1 to 1,000. And Ukraine isn't running that trade once as a lucky exception. It's running it repeatedly, across multiple bases, through multiple agencies, week after week. Now zoom all the way out because this single airfield story connects directly to something much larger unfolding across Russia as a whole. Ukraine's general staff reports that its broader strike campaign has now disabled 43% of Russia's entire oil refining capacity since last August, costing Russian industry roughly $13.5 billion in the process. And a recent poll found that 81% of ordinary Russians now say they want this war to end, with support for fighting all the way to victory collapsing down to just 9%. Jets burning on the ground in Crimea, refineries knocked offline across the entire country, Russian public opinion shifting away from continued war. These aren't separate, unrelated stories happening to line up by coincidence. They're the same underlying pressure, applied from completely different directions, all landing at roughly the same moment. It's only fair to be honest about what we don't know yet. No confirmed source has directly measured whether these airbase strikes have actually reduced the number of glide bombs landing on Ukrainian cities each day. That's a reasonable expectation given what's happened, not a fully proven outcome. And there's no public confirmation yet that Russia has begun physically relocating its remaining Crimea-based aircraft to safer bases further inland. This pressure is real, and it's clearly accelerating, but it hasn't visibly forced a strategic retreat, at least not yet. Even so, the overall picture emerging here is genuinely hard to argue with. Russia spent years describing Crimea as an unsinkable aircraft carrier, permanently fortified and permanently secure. Right now, its concrete shelters have reinforced steel doors blown clean off and lying flat on the tarmac. Its submarines are wearing improvised cage armor welded on in a hurry. Its own citizens are telling pollsters, in growing numbers, that they simply want this war over. And the jets that were supposed to be completely untouchable are burning, one at a time, at a financial cost Russia has no realistic way of sustaining forever. Russia built a fortress. It poured the concrete, stacked the air defenses, and told its pilots they were finally safe. What actually happened is that the fortress turned out to be made from the exact same material as everything else in this war. Expensive to build, carefully engineered, and no longer safe from a $55,000 drone that costs less than most people's cars. So what do you think about this story? Let us know in the comments. This is the Frontline Show, and before you go, if you want to see the full inside track on Ukraine's covert Ocean drone operation and how they managed to hit 1,180 Russian targets in this latest campaign, just click the video on your screen to watch the full breakdown.